Hi everyone, and welcome. Today, we are going to dive into another truly horrifying case, the shocking and devastating story of Samantha Fraser, a tragic reminder that monsters wearing human faces cannot be rehabilitated, even by the most seasoned and compassionate psychologists. At the very earliest signs of cruelty, at the very first flash of violence, one must run. Run without hesitation, without doubt. Because people like this do not change. They do not deserve second chances. They feed on power, on fear, on the destruction of those who trust them. They believe they are untouchable, capable of committing the most terrible deeds and escaping all consequences. This is one such story. On a quiet island in Australia, Phillip Island, near Melbourne, an unspeakable tragedy unfolded in the summer of 2018. But to truly understand the darkness that took root there, we have to go back to where this nightmare began, to the very origins of the cruelty that would break a family forever. Adrian Basham, born in 1973, grew up in Australia in what appeared to be a respectable household. His father was a police officer, a man whose job was to protect and uphold justice. Yet what he passed down to his son was something far more sinister. Though Adrian rarely crossed paths with law enforcement in his early years, those who would later examine his past believed his violent outbursts and uncontrollable aggression were rooted in that childhood environment, shaped by a household where authority could easily twist into domination. In fact, when the world would come to learn of the horrifying murder committed by Adrian, his father did not react with condemnation or shock. Instead, drawing on his police experience, he tried to guide his son, offering him strategic advice on how to manipulate the system and avoid the punishment he deserved. Meanwhile, far from such darkness, Samantha Fraser entered the world in the summer of 1980, born into a loving family in the suburbs of Melbourne. Her parents, Janine and Travis, devoted themselves entirely to raising their bright, compassionate daughter. They nurtured her intellect, encouraged her interests, and supported her every dream. Samantha excelled academically and in sports, collecting awards and admiration along the way. She was a talented gymnast, a graceful dancer, and eventually the leader of her university's cheer squad. Her heart, however, belonged to psychology. She studied diligently, driven by her desire to help people heal. When she earned her degree, with honors, she stepped eagerly into the medical field as a psychotherapist, quickly earning the trust and gratitude of both colleagues and patients. She was doing exactly what she was meant to do, making lives better, offering light where others felt only confusion and pain. But fate can be cruel in its choices. In late 2005, Samantha met Adrian. A chance meeting, a friendly connection, and soon, much more. Those who knew them couldn't understand what bound them together. Samantha was kind, calm, and empathetic. Adrian was harsh, confrontational, prone to anger. She sought to ease conflict. He fed on it. Yet opposites attracted, and within a year and a half, they were married. The couple bought a home, close to Samantha's parents. Adrian's job in mineral development involved frequent travel, a separation that, ironically, may have prolonged the marriage. Because when Adrian was home, he was not the charming man Samantha had once believed in. He became a domestic tyrant. He demanded total obedience, total control, not just of Samantha's actions, but of every minute detail around him. A book slightly out of place. Toiletries aligned imperfectly. Any small change could ignite his fury. His obsession with order and dominance seemed less like preference and more like a sign of something deeply disturbed within him. Samantha, with her training in psychology, tried to rationalize his behavior. She hoped time and love might soothe the chaos inside him. She tried to believe that the man she once adored was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the rage. 3 children followed, daughters Jemima and April, and finally, a son, Rex. Samantha cherished them. She wanted a functional, loving home for them. She clung to the belief that fatherhood might soften Adrian. But even their innocent faces could not tame his brutality. In 2014, during another explosive argument, he assaulted Samantha. Fear, shock, shame. These emotions sealed her lips. She told no one. She convinced herself it would never happen again. But abusers rarely stop. A year later, he attacked her again. The pattern was undeniable. The violence was escalating. This time, Samantha found her courage. She went to the police. She protected her children. She left. The divorce was finalized in the spring of 2017. Samantha gained custody of the children and kept the family home. She wanted to rebuild, to heal, to restore the happiness stolen from her. But Adrian refused to release his grip on their lives. He stalked her. He threatened her. He hovered like a predator, waiting for weakness. Samantha felt his presence everywhere. Panic became a constant companion. She installed an alarm system, reinforced windows with bars, positioned surveillance cameras around the property. She told friends she feared her ex-husband might one day break in and kill her. And Adrian only fed those fears, telling people bold, horrifying threats that he would take everything Samantha loved, from her house to her children, even her life. Yet after a year of this relentless torment, the danger seemed to quiet. Adrian appeared less frequently. Perhaps he had finally moved on, Samantha thought. She began to breathe again. In time, she let someone new into her heart. His name was Wayne, a man who cared deeply for her and for her children. Their future looked bright, especially after he proposed, just days before Samantha's 38th birthday. On July 22, 2018, she celebrated surrounded by loved ones, laughing, hopeful, ready for a new chapter. Her friends remembered her glowing with happiness that night. She was finally living again. But joy is fragile, especially when evil is patient. The next morning, Samantha carried on with her day, dropping her children at school, heading to work. But then came the phone call that tightened fear around her heart. Adrian had been seen near her home. She tried to remain calm, telling a friend she'd just be more cautious. Court was approaching. Another hearing on domestic violence. She knew Adrian might try to intimidate her. What she did not know was that he had been preparing something much, much worse. When she failed to pick up her children from school later that day, the alarm bells rang immediately. Teachers knew her situation. They wasted no time alerting the police. Officers rushed to Samantha's house. At first, everything seemed normal, until they entered the garage. There, hanging from the garage door fixture, was Samantha, a scene staged to appear like suicide. But the truth was visible everywhere. Her clothing was changed. Her shoes were missing. Her hair was wet, covering her face. Her body, bruised and beaten beyond anything imaginable. An overturned ladder lay beside her, but the rope was too long. Her feet nearly touched the ground. Forensics would later reveal the rest. The head injury, severe enough to render her unconscious or already dead before she was hanged. Defensive marks on her hands, her attacker's DNA beneath her nails. Blood splatters wiped hastily, but not completely. Adrian's attempt to mask his crime was sloppy, desperate. That same evening, Adrian arrived at his father's home. Fresh scratches scored his skin. His excuse? Tree branches. He obsessively cleaned his motorcycle with wet wipes. Gnats, he claimed. But his father had been in law enforcement too long not to recognize panic in disguise. When police came knocking, questioning the family, Adrian's father lied, pretending he hadn't seen him. Behind closed doors, he told his son how to behave, what to say, how to slip through the cracks of the legal system. But evidence does not bend to lies. Investigators tested the rope. It held Adrian's sweat. They examined his motorcycle. Blood remained in places he hadn't managed to scrub. A bloody blouse of Samantha's surfaced in a trash bin just outside. And the security cameras Samantha had installed months earlier, out of fear, recorded a hooded figure fleeing the crime scene on a motorcycle. It was him. It had always been him. Piece by terrifying piece, the final hours of Samantha's life were reconstructed. Adrian had broken into her home, waited in silence for hours, then ambushed her the moment she returned. She fought, she clawed, she tried to survive, but he beat her until she slipped into unconsciousness, then staged the scene to disguise his brutality as suicide. He washed her hair, changed her clothes, tried to erase every trace of his savagery. Samantha Fraser had lived in terror of this man. She had begged the world to believe her. She had done everything to protect herself and her children. And still, he found a way to take her life, stealing not just a mother, not just a daughter, but a brilliant woman who had dedicated her life to helping others escape their pain. But this was not the end of the story, not even close. The investigation would deepen, courtroom battles would follow, her children would take a stand against the very person meant to keep them safe. Adrian would try to twist the truth, to blame Samantha even in death, to claim she chose to abandon her children and all of her hopes. But justice was relentless. Justice now, after Adrian finally realized that silence and denial could no longer shield him from the overwhelming evidence pointing directly to his brutality, he adopted a new strategy, claiming that while he had indeed been at Samantha's home that morning, he had left her standing and breathing. A lie so transparent that even the courtroom air seemed to reject it, because everyone knew that Samantha cherished her children and their future far too deeply to abandon them by choice, especially not at a moment in her life when hope had returned and love had begun to bloom again. And though his defense team attempted to build a narrative portraying Samantha as emotionally unstable, overwhelmed by the upcoming domestic violence hearing, no one who truly knew her believed for even a heartbeat that she would have harmed herself. The prosecution countered every fabricated claim by presenting a painstaking reconstruction of her final hours, revealing how Adrian forced his way inside her home, waited for hours in the shadows, attacked when she was at her most vulnerable, leaving her body battered and broken, then staged the scene in a pathetic attempt to disguise his brutality as a desperate act she never would have chosen. And when the trial eventually began in earnest, it was not merely a courtroom filled with lawyers and witnesses, it was a battlefield where Samantha's voice, once silenced by violence, found new strength through every tearful testimony, every carefully examined photograph, every small piece of forensic evidence that spoke louder than any lie he uttered. And as her parents sat through each painful detail, clutching each other with the kind of strength born only from unbearable love and unbearable grief, her two eldest children bravely stood before the judge, condemning their father with trembling voices that still held more courage than his ever could, declaring that no punishment would ever be equal to the damage he had done, not only by taking their mother's life, but by shattering the foundation of safety and trust a parent is sworn to provide. And though the youngest child was spared from reliving the trauma inside that courtroom, his absence was its own tragedy, a reminder of innocence, robbed by fear so deep that even the idea of seeing his father again was unbearable to him. And so the months marched on, weighed down by legal motions and emotional exhaustion. But Samantha's family refused to falter, because they knew she deserved justice that would echo across every year stolen from her. And when the final verdict was delivered in February 2023, the silence that followed felt sacred, a shared breath held by everyone whose heart had been touched by her story, as the judge declared Adrian Basham guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for at least 30 years, a sentence that could never restore what was lost, but served as a formal recognition that Samantha's life mattered, that her suffering would not be buried under excuses or manipulations. And though her family left the courtroom knowing that they had won the hardest battle they would ever have to fight, they also carried the devastating truth that no prison walls could bring Samantha back to her children, who now move through the world without the warmth of her embrace, and instead are guided by the steadfast love of their grandparents, who stepped into guardianship with hearts both proud and broken, determined to give these three young lives every opportunity Samantha once dreamed of for them. And within their home, her presence remains in photographs that capture her smile, in bedtime stories she used to read, in the holiday traditions she created with laughter and tenderness. And as years pass, they learn resilience not as a choice, but as a survival instinct, an unwanted inheritance from the cruelty inflicted by the person who should have protected them above all else. While beyond the walls of one devastated family, Samantha's memory has sparked a far-reaching conversation about domestic violence and the urgent need for systems designed to protect victims to evolve more quickly. Because too often, danger is recognized only in hindsight, when it is already too late, and advocates now raise her name as both a warning and a call to transform the way threats are assessed, to treat psychological terror with the same seriousness as visible harm, to ensure that when a victim says, "I am afraid he will kill me," the world does not respond with caution, but with action strong enough to alter the outcome. For Samantha's tragedy was not an unpredictable anomaly, but a foreseeable result of escalating violence ignored for too long, and the community that once knew her as a neighbor, a colleague, a cheerful presence at school, drop-offs now carries the weight of knowing that horrors can exist silently behind familiar doors, hidden beneath practiced smiles, and her friends often replay the memory of her final birthday celebration, remembering how she radiated renewed hope, unaware that a predator lurked nearby, planning to extinguish that light forever. And they speak of her not as a victim, but as a woman who never stopped trying to live fully despite her fear, who dared to dream beyond the trauma she endured, who poured compassion into others until the day compassion could no longer protect her. And even though the judicial system ultimately delivered a measure of justice, there will always remain a sense of unfinished responsibility, a need to honor her by preventing others from sharing her fate, because Samantha Fraser deserved a life filled with joy and milestones yet to come, a future rich with love, adventure, and the proud moments of motherhood she earned every day. And the world must now stand in defense of those who remain trapped in similar shadows, striving to escape the control of those who believe themselves unstoppable. And while Adrian spends the rest of his days in confinement, stripped of the power he once abused so violently, the impact of his actions remains an open wound, one that society must work tirelessly to heal by refusing to ignore the earliest signs of abuse by empowering victims with real safety and unwavering support, and ultimately by ensuring that Samantha's story is not merely retold as a tragedy, but recognized as a turning point that drives meaningful change, a reminder that love should never require survival skills, that fear is not a normal part of partnership, and that monsters are not mythological beings hiding in the dark. Sometimes they are the very people once trusted most, and understanding that truth may be the most important legacy she leaves behind, guiding us toward a future where fewer lives end in silence and sorrow because the world finally chose to listen, to intervene, and to protect those whose safety depends on the courage of others. Her legacy now resonates as a call to listen, to act, and to protect those whose voices tremble beneath the weight of fear, ensuring that no life is lost because warnings were not believed or danger was ignored.